Hey, how's everybody going? Welcome back. Hey, this is Long Island Audit. The guy's a good dude. He's a great journalist, and he is interviewing a deputy chief. He's a retired. He's a former deputy chief, and he's going to tell you what is going on with the police, your council people, the towns, why it's jacked up with the way it is. It's not what you think. I've been telling this for a long time. Corporations, and I'm blasting the whole government show. And this guy's going to confirm what I've been saying all along. So check this out and enjoy.
I'm joined by Lance Fisher, former deputy chief. Nice to meet you, Lance.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
So we got connected. I came down here to Melbourne, Florida, and I was investigating Mayor Paul Alfrey, the mayor of the city of Melbourne, and made quite a splash around here in this area. And you were former deputy chief for the Palm Bay Police Department, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you had reached out to me, wanted to do a little sit-down interview. I would love to pick your brain about police culture, about what's going on in the Palm Bay Police Department, because from what you've told me already off camera, it seems very questionable behavior, very concerning behavior for the public. So, first of all, if you want to tell the audience what's your background.
Yeah, no problem. So my background is I did 6 years in United States Marine Corps, so I was an infantryman. Right after that, as a lot of military do, they go right into law enforcement. So I did four and a half years in Rocky Mount, North Carolina, and then I moved down here and I've been with Palm Bay. I was in Palm Bay from 2004 all the way until I was separated in 2024. And so I made it all the way to the rank of deputy chief. So I'm an FBI National Academy graduate. I've been to the senior management for policing. I've done the FBI trilogy. So I have all the background. And so I think, towards the latter of my career, I was seeing that there were things going on within my own agency and then throughout the country of where failed leadership at my level and above, where we weren't holding our officers accountable. We're actually justifying incidents, use of force incidents that shouldn't have been justified, and it started wearing down on me, and so I started speaking out as a deputy chief, still with my department.
While you were still active with the police department,
While I was still active.
All right, enough is enough. I'm going to start speaking out against these kind of misconduct and accountability, lack of accountability.
Yeah, I filed a whistleblower complaint with my city attorney, my city manager, while I was employed, while I was a deputy chief, against my chief, and for some of the actions that he failed to recognize, that he failed to hold officers accountable. We were injuring our citizens, killed our citizens unnecessarily, and when we as leaders fail to hold our officers accountable, and then when we as leaders are not held accountable, that stuff just trickles down, and your community and your taxpayers, they're the ones that pay for that. When the lawsuits start coming, it's the taxpayers that foot that bill. It's not the chiefs, it's not the deputy chiefs, and it's not the officers. And so that's kind of where I've now spoken. And I'll be honest, I've done this for 15 months at city councils. I've went all over. I've been on Brevard News. I've traveled Coppeville down south, and I've been trying to get my message out. And then when I saw that you came into Melbourne, and the splash that you made, that's when I was like, man, I really want to see how he's getting his message out, because councils don't care. Your city leaders don't care. Your elected officials don't care. They honestly don't care.
Right.
So that's kind of where I'm at today.
Yeah, I mean, and that's a huge problem. When I go speak I've spoken at city council meetings and town council meetings across the country, and when I do it, I'm speaking to my audience. I'm speaking to the residents. I'm trying, because I know they don't care. There's never been a time where a city council member was like, "Tell me more," or "Hey, can I meet with you after the council meeting and you give me more information about this, because it's really concerning to me." Like Mayor Paul Alfrey of Melbourne, who allegedly using his his deceased brother's credit card for luxury items, using a notary to forge documents. He was a former Melbourne police officer, canine officer, who was forced out of the department for some misconduct regarding narcotics. As you know, as a deputy chief, you have to have there's like a logbook, right, where you have to have witnesses sign in. All of the 22 times the mayor, when he was a canine officer, didn't have anybody sign the witness log sheet. So, I'm very grateful for the opportunity to speak with you, because as somebody who, served in the military, who was in law enforcement for many years, who made it all the way up to the rank of deputy chief. You have a lot of inside knowledge, not only of just your department, but of the culture as a whole in law enforcement. Because I tell my audience all the time, I'm not anti-law and order. I'm pro-law and order. I'm just not pro-law enforcement in its capacity as it is today. I think it's systemically bad. I think it comes down from the leadership. I've seen good leaders in police departments that I've spoken at, that I've done trainings with different police departments across the country, district attorneys' offices, and there are some good leaders, and it always starts with the good leader. But if you don't have the good leader, then the rank and file are just going to emulate the leader, and if they're bad, they're going to be bad. They're going to not be held accountable. So what kind of instances in your department would you say specifically were issues that you saw as deputy chief?
Well, I've talked about a few of them, but just our failure to de-escalate. I was finding that our officers were escalating more incidents than they were de-escalating. So one particular one that I talk about is I talk about that we had an officer that literally, a gentleman runs a red light on a motorcycle. He chases him for 2.5 minutes all the way through a shopping complex. They go through drive-throughs and all this stuff, low speeds, right? But then he ends up having his trainee pull alongside him on Palm Bay Road, which is a 6-lane road, traffic flying everywhere, pulls up alongside him and tases him off the moving motorcycle.
Wow.
The guy crashes, breaks his clavicle, 5 ribs, and he ends up going to the hospital. So we do an investigation. Obviously, we won't even call it a vehicle pursuit, which I was like, that's crazy. He literally chased him for 2.5 minutes. Supervisors never get on the radio to acknowledge that it's a pursuit. They barely even acknowledge that he's chasing this motorcycle through a shopping complex. So when the internal investigation is done, the officer says, I did nothing wrong. I did not violate policy. And so, we go around the table and we sit, in our staff meetings, our secret meetings, we sit around the table just like this, and everybody gives their opinion. And when it comes around to me, I tell the chief, you got to terminate this guy. He needs to be criminally charged. To me, this was an aggravated battery. He could have died. It was a lethal use of force, a deadly force. When you're tasing somebody off of a moving motorcycle, this guy could have been killed. He could have ran over by a car. And then my chief chose to give him 100 hours off. He chose to reach out to 2 local foundations, the Palm Bay Police Foundation and the Sheriff's Department Charity Foundation, and give this guy financial assistance because this created a financial situation for this officer.
Because of the 100-hour suspension.
Yeah, he didn't say it in that way. He's like, well, he has some, I think he was pending foreclosure, repossessions, things like that. But you're doing it at a time that you're supposed to be punishing him,
right?
Giving him 100 hours off. And then he did terminate this guy. And then 6 months later, this same officer is involved with the Thomas Farley case, where the sergeant on the radio or on the body camera says, "I don't have charges on this guy. I think it was a loitering complaint." This gentleman takes off running, and they end up tasing him at the top of right as he's jumping over a fence. He falls the other side, breaks his neck, and is paralyzed. And in the body camera footage, you see the officers kind of mocking him. Oh, he's saying, I'm paralyzed. I can't feel my legs. Oh, you were running just fine a minute ago. And then, unfortunately,
that officer was still that same officer was involved in that.
That's incident? The same officer that
the motorcycle incident to the paralyzing.
Correct. The chief of jail failed to terminate, negligent retention, and so because that officer was still employed, he was able to now tase Mr. Farley, who unfortunately just lost his life in 11 months after that incident because of complications, because of that tasing. And I don't even know it was even investigated as a in line of duty death. I don't know how it even handles, but those were the incidents, And then I saw where my chief weaponizes his entire department to attack his neighbors because it's a sober living facility, not because that there were issues on the street like narcotics complaints or anything like that, because he just didn't like the fact that there was a sober living facility. And,
in his neighborhood,
across the street from his house. We have 4 of them in the city. That one, there was 185 police-initiated calls for service. So we went there 185 times.
Police-initiated calls for service.
Not citizens. The other 3, and that was in a 9-month period. So 185 times in 9 months, we went there. The other 3, 1 time in 2 years. Do we have a police-initiated call for service.
Wow.
And you know, and I pulled the public records request, the patrol logs, the inside logs that we have, 0 tolerance. And I had the text message from the chief of police, basically saying I'm pissed off because one of them was being wheeled out on an ambulance, just pissed off. I got the records from all the pedestrian citations that these residents were written, the bicycle citations that they were written, all because they simply resided at a house, or people that came and went. The logs of all the tags that were written down, the names that were written down, all because they lived across the street from the chief. Again, 3 other houses, none of this activity. You know, and the patrol log says, oh, we had narcotics complaints. No, we didn't. I have the CFSs. There's not a single narcotics complaint. And when I mentioned this to our city council, the mayor says, oh yeah, we put a task force together to save babies. There's not a baby in a single call for service, not a baby in there at all. But again, it's the continual excuses that our leadership makes for police chiefs and that failure accountability. So
Right. I mean, that just, you know, it goes that there is a lack of accountability. There is the mayor, he's not going to care. The city council doesn't care. They're all part of the same group. And that's why I think it's very important that you're coming out and speaking out and blowing the whistle on these sort of incidents, because you were part of like the upper echelon, right? You were a deputy chief of the Palm Bay Police Department. So you were in those meetings. You saw everything for what it was, and you saw what was going on. So it's important that you're speaking out. And I think you made a good point earlier when you were talking about how they don't foot the bill. So I want to get the inside perspective. Are the police department, they don't care about lawsuits, right? They like you've never seen like an officer say like, oh man, they're going to sue me, or the police chief saying, hey, we're open for a lawsuit because you used excessive force. Is there like some sort of, do they care about lawsuits?
they don't care one bit. The only thing they care about is the perception of, you know, when it hits the media. You know, we had an incident where we had an officer on Pinewood. You see him on video, you can Google it, is this excessive force Palm Bay PD. And this officer, it's a misuse of 911 call, basically. And it turns out the officer, 7 days after another use of force incident that they were sued against, takes this guy to the ground. He's UFC pummeling him in the face. The report says he broke away and he was tased, and due to the tasing, he fell and broke his eye socket, basically. Doesn't mention the strikes to the face. But we didn't hear anything about it until the Ring camera comes out. The news media hits it. Now all of a sudden we're worried about it. But we weren't worried about the lawsuits, and we justified it. We justified it just like we did the week before when this same officer pummeled a dude for not having a red light on a Segway. I mean, just craziness.
So,
and I'm sorry to butt in, but so the chief is openly concerned about the actions of this officer, and the chief and I are in the parking lot when this officer walks up to him, and the chief asks him, "What happened, man? Why so 0 to 100 so fast?" And the guy said, "I dealt with him before, and he pissed me off." And the chief literally had concerns, but he's never followed up with those concerns, and that's the failed accountability that I'm talking about.
Right.
Now this officer knows everything he did is accurate, is good to go, and I can continue to act like this because nobody's told me I'm wrong.
Right. And I've always said the number one, you know, a lot of officers I talk to, I'd say, you know, training is an issue, or the lack thereof of training regarding constitutional rights, de-escalation, things of that nature. I'm a firm believer that the number one problem in law enforcement is the lack of accountability, because if you can just do whatever you want, violate a citizen's rights, use excessive force, and you know you're not going to face any sort of accountability for it, you know, not only are you going to repeat that, but other people are seeing that. So other officers are seeing that, hey, officer so-and-so did XYZ and nothing really happened to him, you know? So maybe they're like, I can do XYZ too. The lack of accountability is very concerning to me. In your experience, because I'm sure you've worked with internal affairs investigations over the years as a deputy chief, is internal affairs, my perspective from an outside perspective on internal affairs, is that it's a department, it's designed to protect the officers, not to hold them accountable or expose their wrongdoing. It's to paint the narrative the best way possible, in the best light for these officers that are being investigated. What's your experience with internal affairs?
100%.
Department?
So I'll speak about Palm Bay, because I know there are some departments that I think that have active IAs, and they literally, I've seen where they'll go undercover and try to catch their officers. That is not ours. Our policy with Palm Bay, ever since I've been there, is our internal affairs will not open up their own investigation on an officer. They will follow up on complaints. But remember, that person is appointed by the chief based on loyalty. The chief puts somebody in that office that he believes that will be loyal to him and then will protect his agency. And when I say protect his agency, because that protects the chief's image, right? Because the chief of police, and I say this over and over, their egos are so large, they believe their job is to protect their officers. Not their agency, but to protect individual officers. And when you do that, you fail your agency and you fail your community. And I don't believe that's right. I think the chief's focus, his job is to be honest and transparent. And when somebody screws up, say, we messed up. But we're too afraid to say that because we don't want to make our agency look bad. We don't want to make the chief look bad. And then what will the guys think about me, right? My credibility, because Chief Agello said to me, my credibility, if I bring you back as a deputy chief, my credibility, he didn't care about me as a person, he cared about his credibility. And that's what it comes down to.
What's best for his community, what's best for his department, it's about his own personal image, the police chief's image on, with not with the community, somewhat with the community, but with his own officers, right? With the rank and file officers, what will they think of me, When you started speaking out against the police chief and against, the department as a whole and started blowing the whistle on all these things that are happening, what was that like internally? Like, what was that like with the rank and file, with other, deputy chiefs or, lieutenants? What was that like in the culture of the police department?
Well, first thing, I've been doing this job long enough to know where my career was going to go after this, right? Because I was the next chief.
It wasn't like you didn't know. Right?
I was the next chief. That was the succession plan we had in place. I was the next chief of the Poly Police Department. That didn't happen. I sat down with my wife before I sent that email and that letter to the city attorney and the city manager outlining police misconduct, I believe, at the hands of Chief Agello. I said, my career's over. I'm going to be terminated. I'm going to be fired. I will be outcasted. And that was a decision that we made. I literally had to sell my home because I was separated 3 days. I sat down with our city attorney at their request in August of 2024 to provide them a full two-hour interview and outline everything. 3 days later, Chief Agello was able to sign my denial to extend my medical leave. So 3 days after I filed a complaint against him, an official complaint, he was able to deny my medical leave. Although we had officers that were on leave for 2 years, a year and a half, a year and 2 years. I was on leave for 1 month, and he wouldn't extend me. I was going through, like a lot of law enforcement, I was going through some mental health issues. I was separated before I was ever treated by a workman's comp doctor. They never even gave me an opportunity to get treatment because the difference between me, and I've had this conversation with somebody who was on the force for 2 years. I was like, but you never spoke out against the chief, did you? That's why I was separated so fast, because they wanted to silence me. So immediately after I filed my complaint, my emails were shut down, my work phone was shut down, I wasn't allowed access to the building. They picked up my car, and there was emails and conversations to the entire agency, don't speak with me, and if I'm on the property, to call a command staff member. But not one person ever reached out to me. Not my boss, not my subordinates, nobody in command staff ever told me, you're not allowed on the property, your access has been denied, your phones have been shut off, and emails are shut off. Not one person had the fortitude or the cojones to even say, hey man, we're cutting you off. I found it all out on my own. I was literally going to the police department to meet an officer from an outside agency to find out I couldn't get in the building. And I was told, oh, you need to call a commander. Commander wouldn't even talk to me. Wouldn't even talk to me. So yeah, so and you hear this, a bad cop, or all cops are bad because they don't speak out. It's a tough career, but you have to know what happens when you speak out, and you have to be willing to accept those. And so I've been critical of some of the officers of my own agency, because they'll certainly call me up. They call me up and they want to talk to me, and they want to tell me how the FOP president just gets hit with allegations of sex on duty and that kind of stuff. And you talk about IA, and then they don't sustain any of the hard stuff. They sustain the little stuff.
Right.
And then he writes an endorsement, and then he gives an endorsement for the next chief, his best friend.
Right.
He saves his career. But yet that gentleman just reached out to me a month and a half prior saying we need an outside chief. But yet when he gets jammed up, he's willing to turn his back on all the other officers and say, oh, the FOP endorses Chief Spears as our next chief. Never holds a vote, never gets with membership,
And for those who don't know what FOP is,
It's Fraternal Order Police. That's the union that the Palm Beach Police Department uses.
right? And I've always been someone who says that unions and police departments are, especially where I'm from Long Island, New York, and we have one of the highest paid police departments. My county is one of the highest paid police departments in the country, and I've been told by sources inside that department that the union is throughout the power, not the police chief. Is that more or less what you've experienced, or how does that work? How does the union, the Fraternal Order of Police, play into everyday policing or personnel decisions, things of that nature?
Well, so I'll just give a quick scenario. So the first time I spoke out against Chief of Jail in the city of Palm Bay was, I believe it was September the 5th of 2024. So 2 weeks later, we have the next council meeting. The chief has filled the entire chambers with his SWAT team, his officers. So now there's 40 officers in there because they know I'm going to speak again. It's the third time he's done it. He did it on July 3rd. Brought them all in there. Wasted, I think I did the math, almost $5,000 of taxpayers' money to fill that room to try to silence my First Amendment speech. Right. So
Wow.
on I believe it was September 19th. So the following council meeting, I'm set to speak again. The FOP's lawyer gets up there and speaks on behalf of the chief. They're in bed with each other. So it's the chief's job to protect the community. It's the FOP to protect their officers. That's my opinion. The union is designed to protect the officers, not the chief of police. So when you have the FOP's lawyer up there speaking on behalf of the chief of police, it tells you they're one and the same. Nobody's protecting the community. Everybody's protecting the police. And those officers, the chief, the FOP, everybody. Not one person is protecting the community. And I'll go off the subject to stay with that. So the NAACP is to protect the black community from complaints against police departments and racial discrimination. Rodney Edwards is the South Brevard NAACP president. He is also the deputy city attorney for the city of Palm Bay. So if a black citizen, files a complaint against the Palm Bay Police Department, is he going to be loyal to the citizens he's sworn to protect as the president of the NAACP, or is he going to protect them, or is he going to protect the city as a city attorney? And that's the type of conflicts that I've been talking about, that we're not protecting our community. And when you ask, why do I speak out now? Because I recognize those. Because I was a part of the problem. I've never, ever said, that I wasn't part of, I was a part of the problem, not a part of the solution. And I realized that towards the end of my career, when I was sitting in the meetings, we'd go around the table and we'd be like, we'd look at body camera footage, we'd be like, oh, stop right there. See, he did touch his vest. That's what we're going to do. We're going to say he touched his vest. That's why we mounted him and pummeled him in the face, and then wrote a report basically saying it was a tasing. When he tried to run away, and we tased him, he fell and broke his face. Yeah, we won't even mention the strikes. But that's kind of why I'm doing what I do now, because even as a deputy chief, I've been yelled at, berated by our mayor, just completely ignored. They've called me disgruntled, they called me everything, but they've never called me a liar. They've never called me a liar because I have the facts to prove it.
So you had mentioned to me off camera, we were talking about, the sort of information that you had, and you had mentioned something about a BB gun or pellet gun with the police chief. Do you want to go into that?
Absolutely, because this is another thing.
That was concerning to me when you told me. So
I would think it'd be concerning to anyone, right? So I have text messages, command staff, because we had a command staff group. We would use our personal phones to avoid public records requests.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, I've shown it, right? So in this text message, Deputy Chief Spears.
That's all the statement you just made right there. I've always said that that's what happens, but to have somebody on the inside that says, we talk to each other on our personal phones, so that way no one can request the records.
Yeah, that's
what we did by design.
And then when the chief and I started butting heads, that was one of the things he was saying. He said, you don't even participate in our group text anymore. And I said, they're not on my work phone. I don't have to, but I have, and I have those. And so this particular incident, so a couple of children were starting a fire on a canal, children. And then the chief says, and I can forward this to you, I'll happily do it. I think James Madison posted them on there. But basically he says, oh, look at these little children out here starting a fire. This is what I got going for my house. And the chief said, oh, you're like that little snitch that calls the police and sits in the shadows and watches what happens. And then the chief says, you should just buy a pellet rifle and pop them one by one. And then the commander, because it's think tank mentality, a commander says, L, and I laughed my ass off, was about to type the same thing. And literally, they posted pictures of the children, and that's what he says, buy a pellet rifle and pop them one by one. And I'm thinking, how does a chief of police, and I'm in the text message, right? I don't respond. You can see my little blue bubbles. But how does a chief survive that, right? How does he survive that? And then he wants to go to the school.